All right, everybody. It's 7 o'clocky, and we're going to go ahead and get this started. We'd like to welcome everybody to our November 3rd webinar, we like to call it. This is kind of our last hurrah for PRF season, and we know that's why a lot of you are here, trying to figure out the best way to allocate your coverage or if it should affect your coverage at all. My name is Ross Bronson. I'm the Ag Risk Consultant for Red Summit Advisors. And we have Brian Bledsoe with us, who is the man of the hour. And I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to Brian here. There will be opportunities for questions when Brian is done. And we will also bring up any questions you want to put in the chat along the way. We'll bring those up at the end. So Brian, why don't you take it away?
Very good, Ross. Thanks again. And just want to preface this evening by saying there's not a whole lot that's new to add that I really haven't shared with you guys already over the past, few months or so. But one of the important things that I've been really hitting very hard is the fact that it's really important if we're looking to change this pattern that we've been in that has been facilitating such dryness across the Western United States, is that we had to do a couple of things. We needed to first rid ourselves of the La Nina that's going on. And secondly, we also had to warm the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And so what I have here in front of you is what it's looked like for the past year. And I really haven't seen any noticeable bump in it until here recently, where the October reading, it came up from like negative 2.35 to negative 1.79. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still quite negative, but last year at this time, we were cratering to almost twice the negative that it is right now. We were down to a little over -3. And that really helped to facilitate this La Nina to last for an extended period of time. So when we warm the PDO up, it makes it not only that much easier for La Nina to go away, but also to stay away. And that's when we flip the pattern. Remember that the transition that I showed you last month that occurred in 2013 and 2014 that showed that. And as I said, I'm not saying that's exactly where we're headed, but the fact that we're entering fall and we actually saw the PDO come up just a bit, that's at least a little bit of optimism from me. We'll see what happens as we head into, wrap up November, but I was pleased, if nothing else, to see that. We still have La Nina firmly in place. That's the oval shaped area that I've got right there. Lots of La Nina screaming at you in that particular map when you're seeing all of those blue shades there extending off the west coast of South America. So that in itself is probably not going to change, at least for the next couple of months. And that's kind of what we've been talking about, that we would max this last leg of La Nina out here during the next few months and then gradually see it go away, and then possibly even entertain the thoughts of an El Nino coming up late in 2023. And that's kind of what this graph is showing you right here. The blue bars show you that the probability of La Nina existing above 50% are going to linger through January, February, March. But after that, those probabilities drop off quite significantly. We come back to more neutral territory, and then you see the red bars on the graph. Those indicate El Nino probabilities, and those have actually been coming up quite a bit as early as, say, late summer in the June, July, August timeframe, upwards of about 30% or so, which at this range is somewhat significant, I'll be honest with you. So we had something we have to kind of entertain, and that's something that I've included in the state breakdowns that I've been working on now for the better part of the past few months or so. So that is still remaining very consistent as far as the overall trend is concerned. And at this point, I think that's pretty important. Another thing that I want to show you, and this is more of a short range thing. So if you have clients wondering about what the next couple of months are going to be, or how they're going to finish 2022, this is the Madden-Julian oscillation that I talk about a lot. I just wanted to revisit this with you again and show you that it's basically tied to thunderstorms over in the Indian Ocean, okay? And when those things blow up, they send this atmospheric signal across the Pacific, and when it gets into certain regions of the Pacific, it ends up, facilitating wetter areas or drier areas or whatever. Is a very important 40 to 60 day cycle that I talk about a lot. So what phase is it going to predominantly be in? Well, what you're looking at right here, I know is a bunch, but follow me here. On the left side of the map, you've got November 5th all the way down to November 17th. So this is a forecast, okay? And what this forecast is it's forecasting the westerly wind bursts there that are in red and orange, and the easterly wind bursts that are in blue and green. And what you see here is a convergence. They're coming together right over here. If you look down at the bottom of the map, you see right over Indonesia, right there, or region 6, if you will. That's essentially the phase that the MJO is probably going to be predominantly in over the next few weeks or so, or at least through November. So the fact that we see those blues and greens right there, those are really strong easterly trade winds that are reinforcing the La Nina that we currently have in place. So what I like to see is when those blues and greens start to go away, not just in a short term, but over a long term, that is an atmospheric signal to me that is suggesting that La Nina is on its way out. Okay, so this thing I look at not necessarily every day, but certainly every 5 to 7 days to see exactly how things are evolving right here. But that's something I'll look at. But you might ask yourself, well, MJO phase 6 or phase 7, what does that mean? Well, for phase 6, this is the phase that it's going to be working through. And that's what it's been doing over the past week or so, is working through phase 6 and then 7. So if we have a negative ENSO or a La Nina, it's November, and we're in MJO phase 6, this is the weather pattern that really dominates. We've got a low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska. We've got high pressure over the nation's midsection. And right there, you see where those two come together. That's where the jet stream flows in. So that's why the weather has been getting increasingly active across parts of the West, especially Northern California, the Pacific Northwest. And I don't see that necessarily changing as long as the deck is stacked this way. So for the next couple of weeks, this is a snowfall potential we have during the next couple of weeks. It's going to light things up in the Cascades. It's going to light things up in the Sierras, also parts of the Rockies. Some pretty significant snow right there, courtesy of this type of weather pattern, where we're bringing the jet stream in off the Pacific, the trough of low pressures up in the Gulf of Alaska. It's a good pattern to start the snow guns flying up in the western part of the United States. In terms of total liquid moisture, by that I'm saying rain and snow, this is what it looks like in the West. And you see even down in Southern California, they're probably going to get some rain out of this. Again, this is over the next couple of weeks, which is significant. Now, if you go farther east, look at the gap that you have here from southern Montana, eastern Wyoming, down through eastern Colorado, eastern New Mexico. That's because the jet stream is using these mountains as a ramp. So if you're on the west side of the Continental Divide, hey, you're doing just fine. You have all this moisture. But as that air comes down the east slope of the Continental Divide, you get effectively a rain shadow that develops right there. Not zero moisture, but certainly not great prospects. All of it is loaded up a little bit farther to the west. And for folks that say, well, La Nina is always supposed to bring dryness, into California, that's way. That's not how this works. If you remember last December, we saw record snowfall and record rainfall in a storm that lasted about 3 to 4 days. And then the rest of the winter was a complete failure. So it's not about one storm in this. It's about sustained moisture. And if you could sustain a pattern to effectively break you out of that dryness, that becomes increasingly important. But as it stands, you still see the best liquid moisture in all of this, whether it's rain and snow combined or simply rain. You still see favors far northern California and on up into Washington and Oregon, which is very classic for a La Nina episode to kind of favor. So hopefully that makes some sense over the next couple of weeks or so. If you have some customers that are wondering about that, feel free to share that information with them, that this is not necessarily indicative of what the pattern's going to stay in for the next few months or so, but you will get these short-term bursts as the seasonal change takes place, and we see these weather patterns kind of shift around just a little bit. So I thought that was important to share with you guys, because things are going to get pretty active in the western part of the country going forward. This still stands true, though. If you're in a La Nina episode, and I've got those years up there from November to January, you see the areas that have been predominantly dry. And I've prefaced this by also saying every La Nina is different, every El Nino is different, but as far as an average is concerned, you see what it does. It keeps things drier than average in those yellow, oranges, and reds, and wetter than average in the green areas, which for folks in the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, again, one storm doesn't make a wet season. 2 storms doesn't even make a wet season. It's about sustained moisture that comes in over a period of a few months right there. But those analogs, at least as far as the La Nina is concerned, really haven't changed a great deal. The Climate Prediction Center always issues their forecast. This is for November, December, and January. Obviously, it's got the southern tier dry. It's got the Pacific Northwest and parts of the Northern Rockies wetter than average. This is a very classic La Nina look. This graphic is built off of those averages that I just showed you. The white shaded areas are generally supposed to be what's considered average, but with La Nina, you usually have some pretty significant extremes where it doesn't take a very large area to go from significantly wetter than average to significantly drier than average, and that usually cuts across the state of California. So if it were me, you could probably drag that green down a little farther south into Northern California, but I probably wouldn't remove the brown shaded areas that is across the southern portion of the state. And certainly the likelihood of seeing drier than average conditions over the next 3 months exists across Arizona, New Mexico, and eastward into Texas. The NMME model, this is what I showed. This was updated in November, or I should say October for November, and it hasn't changed a whole lot either. The new update of this model comes out on the 7th of November. So here in about 4 days, we'll get a brand new update as far as this model goes. But I just wanted to show you what the last one looked like. And you can see for November, it's favoring average to wetter than average conditions across Northern California, the Pacific Northwest, and the north parts of the Northern Rockies, and then drier than average stuff farther east. For January or December, rather, it doesn't budge a whole lot for parts of the West. And that kind of owes to the pattern that is prevailing right there to keep the far Northwest areas wetter than average, and farther southeast you go, drier than average. For January, you see the same type of a signal right there. Drier than average southern tier from Southern California eastward through Texas and parts of the Gulf Coast, wetter than average the farther north you live. For February, it's the same story. The reason why it's the same story is because this model keeps La Nina locked in here through the back part of the winter before it finally starts to exit during the early spring months, which that doesn't change a whole lot even into March. Okay. The one thing that I'm encouraged about is that it doesn't completely shut out California, and it doesn't completely shut out some Western states, which if nothing else, that would be a big win. By the same token, it really keeps areas farther north the wettest. Oregon, Washington, Idaho, parts of Wyoming, Montana, across the northern tier of the country. In April, not a huge change right there. Even the dry signal that pops up isn't all that stout. And I think this is owing to the fact that that La Nina signal has probably gone away, and that paves the way for things to return to quote unquote a more normal type setup around here, even into May. And I know, as we get out into those spring months, you have to kind of take some of that with a grain of salt a little bit because it's at that longer range. But just to revisit, that's what the NMME was showing us for the month of October going forward. The Euro model, again, is showing up what I think is probably the best. And I've told you that before, and I still stand by that. This was the October forecast, okay? So it was released back on October 5th for the month of November. And you can see right there, it's favoring wetter than average conditions across California and parts of the West. Again, owing to the storm system that's going to be dominating off and on over the next couple of weeks. And then farther east, you were drier than average, as the MJO showed you. Remember the H that was over the center part of the country, the low that was up in the Gulf of Alaska, and the jet stream rolling into California. I think it has done a very good job pinpointing what November was going to look like. If we look at December, it isn't a whole lot different, okay? Farther northwest you go, wetter than average. Areas farther east, obviously average to drier than average. When we get into January, again, this would be the 3rd month in a row where things have actually done okay, at least per this model, across parts of the West. That would go a long way to eliminate a large part of the drought. And keep in mind that this is also at the same time keeping areas of New Mexico drier than average, Texas, parts of Arizona. So you might say, well, there's nothing really coming in from the Southwest. You're absolutely right. It's coming in a little too far to the north to really benefit those states that are a little bit farther south, especially across parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas. That's through January. We look at February, we have a little bit of a drier than average signal that sets up across California, but look at all the wetter than average stuff there across parts of the Rockies, also extending eastward out into the plains. And this is also kind of a testament to the likelihood of La Nina going away, that we see that dry signal relax in the nation's midsection across Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. We still keep some moisture flowing in across parts of the West, and there's nothing that's really setting up to give us prolonged extended dryness once that La Nina episode goes away. In the plains, you always have to worry about, dryness at times. But out west, it's really about capitalizing on the winter, the late fall, winter, and early spring to set you up for the spring and summer in case your monsoons setup fails or anything like that. If you don't get that winter moisture out west, you're basically done. And you have to put your hopes on a monsoon, which you're dealing with thunderstorms. So again, that's not as good of a signal as something during the winter. But if nothing else, I'm encouraged by that to see the dry signal start to relax. And I'm also encouraged by the fact that the Euro model seems to have done a very good job in forecasting what the month of November was going to look like. This last model, this was updated not too long ago. This is the IRI multi-model probabilities. So all you need to know is where it's green, the odds of it being wetter than average or better, and where it's yellows to reds, it's obviously drier than average. This is its November, December, January forecast. So again, pretty classic La Nina. The southern tier stays drier than average, the northern tier average to wetter than average. And then if we look at what happens in the January, February, March timeframe, again, it bullseyes those southwest areas with having the better probability of staying drier than average versus areas farther north actually doing a lot better. The question's always posed like, well, which model do you favor? And right now, it's kind of a conglomeration of all of them because they're all locked into the same thing. They all see that La Nina is going to prevail for the next few months here, and then they all kind of have it gradually going away as we head into late winter and the spring. So there's not necessarily one particular model that I'm favoring versus anything else, unless I see some problems with those shorter term forecasts. Case in point, if it's missing November completely, then I'm probably throwing it out because it means it initialized poorly. If it's doing pretty well, I have a tendency to want to ride that model going forward. And right now, the Euro is probably performing the best out of all of them, not in a great fashion, but it's probably doing the best. And going forward, it's probably going to end up being the best as far as this transition takes place, because it also has the La Nina episode going away a little bit sooner. So that's kind of where we stack right now. The latest Euro model, the newest version, comes out here on Saturday. And so what I'll do is I'll put that together this weekend and I'll email that out to Ross and Steve, as well as Melissa, and they can, circulate to that to you guys accordingly. And then obviously when the NMME comes out later next week, I'll circulate that to you guys as well. So, those are kind of my thoughts right now. Not a whole lot has changed going forward, but in terms of, clients asking questions, well, what about the back part of this year? And I've talked to a lot of people about this, and I say, look, there's the possibility that El Nino develops. All right. I've been saying that now for a while. There's also a possibility that it doesn't. All right. Especially at this range. So you kind of have to manage your risk accordingly, which makes it very difficult to kind of load up any type of coverage in the back part of the year, because that part of the year is the most uncertain. The first 6 months of your year are obviously more certain than the back part because it's closer. Your models are performing better. Your analogs are performing better. You see what the oceans are doing right now, which are probably going to perpetuate that pattern going forward for at least the next few months or so. So if they're asking about that, that's kind of how I would couch it to them or rationalize it to them why the first part of this forecast is probably going to be more accurate than the back part. It's just common sense, if nothing else. Questions?
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, you guys can ask anything, unmute yourselves, or put it in the chat, and I will read it to Brian, whichever works best for you. I think to your point, like Brian, there's not a lot changing. We're still waiting to see some stronger signals, is kind of what I'm hearing, to make a stronger assumption of what direction things are going to go.
Well, certainly for the back part of the year, I feel pretty confidently that this La Nina episode is going to go away. The fact that the PDO is actually warmed up a bit uh, during a time of year when it usually should be going the opposite way, I think kind of speaks to that. But if we can get them both to kind of develop in tandem, where the La Nina goes away, the PDO warms up, then you look at the Western United States and you say, well, the chances of us getting wetter than average during the back part of 23 are greater than the chances of it being drier than average. So, you always say, well, if you have clients that absolutely want to load up on a couple of intervals, well, that's great, but that's a pretty tough sell to me. At this point, if you spread your coverage out more evenly, I think you're probably going to perform better, because again, in this pattern, if you're not going to completely shut out the wet season in California like what we did last year, then one storm, even a half of a storm, ruins an interval completely. For certain areas. So I think that's something that I far be it for me to tell an agent how to approach their customer, but when I'm advocating for my folks and I'm advocating for other farmers and ranchers in my backyard, and I tell them, I'm like, look, if you want to load up on an interval that has the driest running total of moisture for the year, be my guest, but it doesn't take much to bust that interval. And when you're talking about some serious wet episodes in the Western United States, that can happen in a very short period of time. So that's kind of how I would, position it to them, I guess, if they've got that kind of question.
So you were talking about the new models coming out the 6th or the 7th, and Trey asked if they were going to get access to those, and that the answer to that is yes. You're going to kind of put together information based off those and send it out.
Yeah, that's what I said just a little bit ago. Maybe he missed what I was saying, but yeah, if once the Euro comes out on Saturday, the NMME comes out on the 7th. What is that, Tuesday? Or no, Monday. I'm traveling early next week, but I'll do my best to try to, if nothing else, put that together and send that stuff out, and then kind of have my comments going forward. To be honest, I don't expect a whole lot of difference in them, for the reason that those two models are going to be initializing their forecast off of La Nina conditions. So right now with the La Nina, going forward, they're probably going to have that same type of flavor, at least through that January, February, March timeframe, and then we'll see what happens after that. Once the La Nina episode, if they still are showing the La Nina episode going away, which I anticipate that they will.
So I guess Cat Colder's asking, what date is the recommendation for best coverage for 23, and how and low and high risk choices available? So I guess what I'm hearing from you, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're anticipating, well, I guess it depends on what part of the country, but wetter Northwest and wetter West in general early.
Mm-hmm.
And then at this point, average until something tells us otherwise, and there's a heavier shift later in the year. Is that kind of
and historically speaking, whenever you go back to neutral or go into some sort of an El Nino, you usually will see those more typical type patterns show up. So if you look at your data for saying, if you're looking at a particular grid and it's averaging things out over the past 40 years or whatever, those types of averages can be used more readily when you don't have an El Nino or a La Nina episode going on, because if you have that, it skews it one way or the other, depending on what part of the country you're in. So the fact that we are most likely going to be going back toward neutral territory late this winter through spring and summer, I think that you would see more typical rainfall dominate for those regions than you would otherwise, because you don't have something governing it in one extreme or the other. Which I think that kind of owes to my point. If you've got somebody wanting coverage, it makes it really tough to load up an interval or two when you're going back toward average for the most part, unless average for a particular grid is really dry during a time of year when you can actually insure, if RMA hasn't blacked that part of the year out for a particular grid. So that's kind of my take, right now, with the fact that we haven't seen anything really budge in the short term. It doesn't make me want to budge a whole lot on the forecast that I've sent out, especially, considering the states recently.
So this might be a good chance to maybe revisit with your agent and your software allocation, because they're going to be based off of long-term averages. And that is where your agent can help you look at a lower and higher risk option based off of your long-term averages, and not necessarily any strong weather indications, aside from we're fairly confident in a wetter winter and early spring in the West.
Yeah, and California it's a real crapshoot, because you look at those analogs and they should struggle during the wet season. But the fact that the models aren't picking up on the fact that they could struggle is indicating to me that this La Nina may go away during the heart of the wet season, and that will allow better moisture to come into the West. I'm pretty much convinced that places in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, those locations are probably going to end up fairly wet. For the reasons that I've mentioned. You drop farther south, and that can change pretty quickly, especially if you lock that weather pattern in a regime where you're bringing that moisture in and it's favoring the Pacific Northwest or the Northern Rockies. And then once the La Nina goes away, well, then that pattern has the ability to change. Remember, I showed you that MJO graphic, and that MJO graphic has been static for the better part of the last year. And because of the La Nina being locked in like that, it prevents the MJO from providing, one, a really strong atmospheric signal, and two, from circulating through those regions and keeping the weather more variable. Once La Nina goes away, weather variability increases, and that's when you can actually start to see more frequent moisture producing storms, even in those places that are showing up as maybe a little bit drier than average in the models or even in the analogs. And I think that probably ends up happening late this winter and the spring when we start to actually see the La Nina go away fully.
And kind of more specifically, we're talking Kansas, late summer and fall. They're kind of wondering what about that? And what I'm kind of seeing is,
what part of Kansas?
We will see just a moment.
Okay.
What part of central?
Central Kansas, I mean, historically speaking, when we have the PDO the way it is right now, there should be some dryness in the midsection until that PDO changes. If we continue to see the PDO warm, that changes it totally. And I would expect there to be is some sort of an atmospheric hangover, if you will, possibly for the first part of 23 in the midsection of the country. And then after the PDO hopefully keeps warming up, that La Nina is no longer existent. That's when we start to see more frequent rainfall, when we actually have a thunderstorm season, where it isn't completely shut out. Now, the farther west you go, if you're talking about Western Kansas, well, that's a different story because they're obviously drier. And every mile you go farther east, you actually have better prospects of storms coming together and producing moisture. So while we might struggle a little bit early, I would expect better times as we head toward late spring, summer, and obviously going toward fall. Especially if we have an El Nino episode materialize, then things can obviously get more active during that time.
Right. And then Joe Wheeling brings up a good point. He's asking about Southwest Colorado, and it often ends up kind of on the edge of a lot of these models, which I lived in Southwest Colorado for a while, and you never, depending on which way it hit those southern mountains, just depended on whether you got some moisture or not. And so I guess what's your kind of thoughts there? You can, even just in what the slide you got pulled up, you can see that Southwest area is just right on the edge.
Yeah, I would say, again, the farther south, you need a southern branch of the jet stream to come in order to remove that dry signal from the southwest. As long as La Nina is going, that's not going to happen. That's not to say that the San Juans couldn't get storms, because they're getting a storm right now where they're actually seeing some good snow. But that's one storm. We need this prolonged period of time where the pattern breaks down, and you see that. That will come back to fruition once the La Nina episode gets out of here. So if you look at, hang on, let me go backwards here. Even this one in particular, okay, this is for November, December, January. You see it has Southwest Colorado in the drier than average right there. But watch what happens when we go forward, even just to the next time frame. Well, it shrinks that drier than average signal farther south. I know you're right on the edge right there, but that to me would indicate with La Nina going away, there's better prospects for bigger moisture producing storms to come into the Southwest during the spring months, like they typically do. And if we back up even a little bit further here, bear with my slides as they're moving at a glacial pace. You don't see that stout dry signal there on the Euro in April. If we go back to, we're going to go back to March here. See, that dry signal shrinks to the south and goes away. And what the model is seeing is that La Nina going away, better storm prospects coming into the Southwest and actually being able to produce. And if we eliminate that completely, well then, and we get back toward neutral, the prospects for monsoon go up, and you really may not have a huge problem during 23 in that regard. It's all about the La Nina going away and the PDO warming up. So we're trending that way. Would I be willing to bet the farm that we're not going to have still some issues across parts of Southwest Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico during 23? No, not entirely. But I at least like where we're headed in that direction.
What other questions do we have for Brian? Those are some great questions. It's so valuable to be able to get on here and ask these types of specific questions. That's one of the reasons we like doing this live. So,
and I know, and look, I know whether you're an agent or whether it's your customer or whatever, you're going to want concrete answers, and that just isn't going to happen. Right. And you can tell your client that for a variety of reasons. First of all, you're talking about seasonal weather forecasting here. All right, there are so many unseen variables that come into play with that. You're talking about models that are modeling seasonal forecasting. So that you're talking about past weather history, which at times may or may not necessarily match up perfectly with what's going on. But at the same time, you guys are talking about 40 plus years of data that you have access to on their particular grid. And as long as you don't have one giant La Nina or El Nino influencing things in one particular way, shape, or form, the data is going to likely be the most accurate measure you have to look at if your client is on the edge of what a model is showing or what an analog is showing, because it's simple statistics from that point on, and those statistics are obviously important, otherwise you wouldn't be using them. So that's what I tell everybody, and they're like, well, you're just a damn weatherman, you don't know anything, and I just shake my head and say, you're absolutely right, that's exactly right, because you're going to think whatever you want to think, but those are the reasons that I always tell clients. And look, that unless you are 100% sure that you are, this dry signal is lock, stock, and barrel exactly where it's at, and I want to load up these 2 intervals or 3 intervals or whatever, the better, more common sensical way to do it is just simply to spread that coverage out, because one storm can bust an interval during the wet season, and B, it gives you more opportunities to capitalize on periods of the year when there may be some drier times. And that's especially true here in the Western High Plains, where at any one particular time of the year, even when things aren't terribly dry, there's probably going to be an interval or 2 there that is going to make you some money, even in a wet time. So, that's kind of my rationale for what I tell them when they're asking for some specifics.
Yeah, and I think another thing that I kind of want to bring up at this point is, especially for folks with property in multiple grids, the software helps us allocate the grid that in general performs better, for lack of a better way to say that. And so you may be on several grids, and your rangeland may be in several grids, but you might have a river bottom property in one grid that channels the storm or something like that. or you may have a high plateau that catches the storms depending on how your systems come through. And so just kind of to back up this idea that maybe this year trusting the software might be the best option, that helps identify those grids that maybe don't catch those storms, or sometimes, identify the volatility. And so that's another thing to consider as you start looking at manipulating your coverage.
And look, and I know December 1 is rapidly approaching here, but we also have, another set of models that are going to come in here during the next week. It gives us a little more time to watch it. And I'm always watching this stuff. So if I see something blink that looks different than maybe what we've been looking for, I'm not very shy about holding that information. I send that stuff out and say, hey, look, you may want to look at doing something like this time of year versus what we were talking about maybe back in September, because it's always evolving. It's weather, and that's what it does.
Well, and two, I guess my plug here again also is that changing up your coverage is actually pretty easy. We just plug it into our software, change things up a little bit, and we print out a new acreage report. Whereas getting signatures for the applications and stuff, that takes a little longer time. So I would encourage anybody who's watching to go ahead and maybe get your app signed and sent in, but make sure agent knows that you're still waiting on coverage, because that's the part that's easier to manipulate later, versus trying to get all those signatures in last minute. So that's something you can also consider is you can do the one and not lock it in until we finalize things with that acreage report.
When is your guys' final, if you've got a client that says, look, I'm really on the fence, I'm signed up, but I want to figure out what my percentages and intervals are. What is that absolute last deadline that you guys can tweak those intervals?
I mean, December 1.
December 1 is your last day that you can tweak it.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to go that far, but yeah, I mean, you can call us the day before, and that's the thing. And Steve might get mad at me for saying so, but we really can. And really, the thing that Steve will support is we're doing this for our producers.
Right.
Sure, we've got paperwork on our end, but when it comes right down to it, it's our producers on the line, and that's what we care most about. So yeah, things can come in. I think, I don't know, that's the app. I'm not sure the exact. I think I'm just assuming it's the same for the acreage report, and we're going to work with that because it's going to be easier to have everything by December 1. So
sure,
but we can change things up to the last minute. So
well, I know you don't advocate that as an agent, because that's a lot of last minute stuff you have to do.
It is.
Yeah.
But again, we'll do what needs done for our producers. So let's see, any other questions before we let y'all get back to your night? I know there's gonna be a lot of folks watching this, the recording later, but it seems like maybe everybody on here got their questions asked. So
okay.
All right, well, Brian, thanks again. It's always great to have you to chat through this with us, and we'll look forward to an update on those next models coming out this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I'll release the Euro seasonal stuff on Saturday, and then the NMME comes in on Monday. I should be able to carve out some time. Just look for that probably I would say on Tuesday. I get a chance to put that out. But yeah, they'll be coming in the next few days.
Okay, and then I guess last quick question is, any of our clients can access your contact information, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you guys have information or questions and stuff, just send me an email. Again, go back to it in case you didn't see it before. Sorry, my computer's lagging just a little bit here. Yeah, I think most of you guys have there we go. Yeah. So shoot me a text, hit me up on email, and then we can totally I can chat with you about what you want.
Okay. leave that up there for just a minute longer so some scribbling can happen.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
I don't write very quick myself, so.
that's all right.
All right, well, we'll let everyone get back to their night. Brian, thanks one more time, and good luck, everybody, on figuring out Mother Nature.
Sounds good, guys. Take care.
All right. Good night, everybody.